we go. Okay, looks like we have everyone on.
Hi, I just want to test. Can you guys hear me? This is Scarlett.
Yes.
Yep. All good, Scarlett.
And then we'll see. Can someone like back there say something?
Hello, hello.
Can you guys hear that?
We can.
Yep.
Okay, I think we're good to get started. Brian, do you want to kick it off? Brian?
Sorry, it was asking me to confirm that it's okay to record, which I did. So thank you everybody for joining and at the request of a lot of the participants, we are, as you can see if you're remote, offering an in-person participation option. We're going to try to do this hybrid. Hopefully that this will work out well and continue to allow people the kind of interaction we've had at our previous meetings. I want to thank the Borough President's Office for providing the space and the tech setup for this. Thanks as always to Emily for organizing the meeting and that added dimension this time as well. So we're adding also to this I guess a bit of an expansion. We've said from the beginning that this will be an opportunity to talk about the various impacts of this project, both the environmental remediation and perhaps as we go forward, other development on the site. We're adding a significant topic to today's meeting, and that is, of course, noise, which I'm sure everybody is aware of, some more personally and directly aware of it than others. But I, as usual, thank the elected partners and the community board and everybody who's, been participating in this on an ongoing basis. Does anybody else just have anything they want to say at the outset? Okay, so hearing no further opening comments, Emily, do you want to just go over the agenda?
Yeah, sure. So I sent it around to everyone, basically sort of same format as before. We'll have DC give an update, then Langan, then go to our community consultants, and then our stakeholder discussion and Q&A, which we're splitting up into sections again. So we'll start with noise mitigation, and we have DEP staff on to talk about that and answer questions, which is great. And then we'll talk about camp monitoring and the general camp program, and then community notification. So I guess we'll kick things off to pass things off to DC.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Emily. I'm Heidi Dudek. I think most of you have seen my face and heard my voice in the past. I am the DEC Division of Environmental Remediation Section Chief, responsible for the oversight of the 250 Water Street cleanup remediation. Today I have with me Rafi Alam. He's the DEC project manager for the 250 Water Street site. He's also been one of our people that have been out in the field observing the work. In addition, we have New York State Department of Health online. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a couple of minutes. I would like to relay Gerard Burks, our DEC Bureau Director for the 250 Water Street project, relay his regrets. He had an emergency and will not be able to attend today's call. So as all of you are aware, remediation of the 250 Water Street site began in May with a limited remedial and excavation and the installation of a foundational element for the New York City 421A Affordable Housing Program. I understand that there's going to be a number of questions and comments from the community that they would like to discuss today with regards to that work, so I'm going to keep my update brief. But first and foremost, the most important thing I really would like to relay to everybody is that based on DEC's observations, and as I said, we did have people in the field observing the work and review of the community air monitoring data with the Department of Health, this first limited stage remediation, this limited excavation and remediation was completed in a manner that was protective of human health and the environment. I will also acknowledge that there were some hiccups, as with most remediation projects at the start, in particular with our extremely sensitive community air monitoring equipment. And that's going to be discussed a little bit later. But when we developed the camp in coordination both with the community consultants and Department of Health and Langan Engineering, that sensitivity of the equipment was acknowledged and redundancy was built in the program. So even with those hiccups, at no time was the community at risk. The work was completed in a manner that was protective of human health and the environment. But also acknowledging that there have been a lot of concerns from the community. DEC and DOH have, as we've stated from the beginning, went back and we're reviewing the current means and methods to implement the work to complete the rest of the remediation. And we've had discussions of additional measures that to be completed while that work is going on, both with HHC, Langan, their consultants, and the community consultants, Excel Environmental, Laura Dodge, and Ramble's Tom Fasillo. So we're still in the process of finalizing those modifications to the means and the methods. Again, the remedy is not changing, it's still excavation, but some of the means and the methods to reassure the community that the remedy is being implemented in a manner that's protective of human and health. And again, these are to reassure. They weren't required by anything that we were seeing, but we understand the concerns and we want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with this. So these measures, Langan's going to go over the modifications in general, but really what we're looking at is limiting the size of the open excavation, proactively using Merconex to prevent the potential release of mercury vapor. And then there's some modifications to the methods used to close down the site at the end of the day, or if there's a weekend, during the weekend when site work is not being completed. And they'll also talk about some, how we're addressing some of those hiccups with the community air monitoring stations. So with that, I think we've got an echo there. I realized talking to everybody and reading all of the concerns out there that the community still has some questions regarding the camp and how it's implemented. So DOH is going to give a quick brief overview of the camp, what they've seen in the data, and their perspective from the project. So with that, Scarlett McLaughlin is the New York State Department of Health Section Chief, and she's going to give you a brief update.
Thanks, Heidi. Hi guys, this is Scarlett again. I just wanted to take a minute to introduce my team that's on the phone here as well. We also have, I'm Scarlett McLaughlin, Region Chief for New York City area. We also have Jacqueline Nealon, who's my Assistant Region Chief, Sarita Wah, who is the Project Manager for the 250 Water Street site, and Renata Ackerby, who is her Supervisor. Additionally, we have Pat Fritz on the line as well, who is one of our mercury experts for camp. So I just want to bring it back a little bit, just for some of the people that haven't always, I guess, been quite as involved in case there's anybody here and this is helpful. The purpose of the camp really is to ensure that work activities on the site are not going to affect the surrounding community, and that site contaminants are not going to be mobilized and move off site so they could potentially affect anybody off site. That's just the basics of it. And so it's based upon 15-minute average readings at perimeter camp monitoring stations. And 1 part per million is slightly above the equipment detection limit for the monitoring units that we have there. We have set the action level extremely low, extremely proactive, with a lot of redundancy built in to make sure that actions can be taken almost as soon as there are detections, even before there's even an action level exceedance in the camp. But the requirement is, if there's an action level exceedance, that's when means and methods and best management practices would need to be taken, such as wetting down to control dust in an excavation area, covering with plastic sheeting, spraying Mercon. All of those things are not set at levels where we think that there could be a health concern. These are set very, very low, much lower than concentrations that would be considered to be a health concern. And that's just, to be proactive, because really we don't want to see anything going off the site. I think that we all share that as a goal in this. We want to make sure that the remediation is conducted in a manner that's protective of public health and doesn't cause, risk to the surrounding community. So just to go into a little bit more detail about that, I talked a little bit about the best management practices that would be required as part of the camp should those action level exceedances occur. But I'd like to say that there's actually been quite a bit of proactive measures that have been taken that are beyond the requirements of the camp as part of this project. And when we've had instantaneous readings that are higher than action levels of the camp, there's actually been work stoppage. There's been Mercon sprayed, trying to control dust, and then investigation of why is this occurring. I think it's really important to note that if work is occurring in a work zone, we would expect to see if there was some sort of release from that or air impacts from that, we would see it at the work zone first. That's constantly monitored at the work zone. And then, we could take actions proactively before those air impacts could reach perimeter stations. So that's important to note, so that can be addressed right there at the work zone if that occurs. But one of the things that we've noticed is with all the redundancy built in, with the lots and lots of monitoring stations that we have, extremely sensitive equipment, that, as expected, there's been some issues. There's been some hiccups, as Heidi said, with the equipment. And that's because it's sensitive. It's working real hard and overtime. That's why we have, them have extra equipment on site to address it. That's why we have multiple types of mercury detectors on site. That's why we have, a proactive measure. We don't assume that if there's a detection that it's due to an equipment malfunction, even though it's been pretty prevalent that when we do have detections, we've noticed issues with the equipment. Just to speak to some of those issues that we've seen, condensation, water getting in a line can cause mercury to be shown as detected on one of the pieces of equipment. It's kind of like your cell phone. If your cell phone gets wet, it may not work really properly. Now we're going to assume if we get a detection in one of these camp monitoring stations, that's a real detection. But I will say that it gets investigated and condensation has affected it. We've had some specific equipment that as soon as we identify a detection and it's been determined not to be due to actual mercury, but due to condensation or some other interfering factor, we have immediate replacement. There's no stoppage of the camp in that area during that. There's another unit that's brought over. This work is stopped immediately. There are best management practices put down, and additional units continue to run. That's one of the reasons why we had that additional roving unit that could kind of go in between different stations and not just have the static perimeter stations there. Another one of the interfering factors that I think is gonna come up here and should definitely be addressed and will be further by Langan when they speak about it is when the foundation element was being put in, there was an instantaneous reading that was higher on the J405. And the reason for that, it was determined to be from the acetylene torch cutting that was in there. So they'll speak to that in a little bit more detail. The DEC project manager was on site for that, and there was some troubleshooting, and I think that they can kind of give you a little bit more detail about that, about the interference of the equipment. But again, that's why we have J405s and 505s on site, because different equipment has different limitations. Let's see. And because of all of these known potential issues, that's why we've worked in so much redundancy for the site, so that it's something we expected. We expected that, due to these low detection limits and these low action levels set so close to detection limits, and working outside with weather conditions, that there could be some issues with equipment. That's why we have so many stations. That's why we have different kinds of equipment. And that's why we always assume if there's a detection, it's a real detection, so that we can be extra proactive, because this is, it's a community with a lot of people. There's sensitive receptors. And we want to make sure that everything that is done on this site is as proactive and as protective as it can be, because honestly, it's a good thing to have contamination removed from a site. Then we don't have to worry about it in the future affecting future generations, or if some activity were to occur. Getting rid of contamination, especially near sensitive populations, is important, for our next generations. So really, I guess to sum up, and I know I've talked a lot, I'm sorry, I want to make sure there's enough time for everyone to have questions and for us to answer them. But I think the most important message here is that the action levels, they're based on 15-minute average perimeter camp station readings. An exceedance of an action level is not a health concern. It's not something that we've set to be, we have this action level exceedance, now there's a health concern to the surrounding community. It's set so much farther, or so much lower than anything that would be a health concern, because we want to be proactive. We want to take steps before there's any sort of a health concern. And that goes for both the action levels for 15-minute averages and instantaneous readings. If there's an instantaneous reading that's above that action level, that's not something that we would see as a health concern. We just want to know, is there contamination going into the air that could affect the offsite community? It doesn't matter that we don't think it's a health concern. We don't want it to go offsite. We're going to take actions to address that. And that's really what we want you to know. Just because we're taking actions to address it right away doesn't mean it's because we think it's a health concern, because we don't want it to go offsite. We don't want it to affect the community, the schools, the people that live and work there and walk by the site with their dogs or their kids. So I guess I'm going to turn it back over, but we are here to answer questions as well. We're always available. You can always reach out and give us a call. Send us an email. We welcome that. I'm really happy that this is a community that's active, that's interested, and it gives us the opportunity to really work with you and see what your concerns are. And, we appreciate that. So thank you. And I'll turn it back over now.
Great.
So I see, Jason, you have a hand up, but do you want to just hold that until we get the sort of a couple of the other presentation out and then come back, or do you have something quick you want to do now?
We might answer the question during our presentation. My preference would be to wait.
Let's wait, sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason.
Great, thank you. So I'll go ahead and start. Mike, can you pull up our slide deck? Great. All right, so my name is Mimi Ray-Gordetsky. I think all of you know I'm a principal at Langan Engineering and responsible for our environmental practice in New York City. And I'm also the project director for the 250 Water Street site. Next. So the first thing that I'll do is provide a little update on the early foundation work that was performed between April 21st and May 27th. This work occurred in the southwest portion of the site. We started by installing perimeter construction fencing and removing some former parking lot structures. We then drilled 4 piles to about 85 feet below grade surface. We installed steel sheeting for supportive excavation during pile cap construction, and then excavated and removed some additional soil to about 8 feet below grade surface in the early foundation work area. In just one localized area, we removed soil to about 20 feet below grade. Then we installed a pile cap on top of the 4 drilled piles and backfilled the excavation area with 2.5-inch stone underlain by a geotextile fabric. As part of this process and to enable the excavation, we collected, treated, and discharged groundwater from dewatering activities during the cap installation. During this work, next slide, please. During this work, the camp system operated continuously. We have a few data points from camp operation during this period. First one is there were no exceedances of 15-minute time-weighted average camp thresholds for mercury vapor or total volatile organic compounds in the work zone. If you recall, we have one station in the work zone, and then we have an additional 6 stations around the perimeter. And we did not exceed for mercury or VOC's total volatile organic compounds within the work zone. We did have an exceedance of PM10, and those are particles less than 10 microns in diameter. That occurred in the work zone on 5/21. Work was halted and dust suppression was implemented per the requirements of the camp. The concentrations returned to background. It's also notable that background conditions on 5/20 and 5/21 were elevated due to poor air quality in New York City at that time. Also during that period where we had this PM10 exceedance in the work zone, there were no 15-minute time-weighted average exceedances for PM10 at any of the 6 perimeter camp stations. We also had no exceedances of 15-minute time-weighted average camp thresholds for mercury vapor during continuous screening of the work zone by the mobile monitor. And this was an ambient air across the site using the handheld Jerome 505 unit. At the request of the community, that unit it screened vapors both at an adult breathing height, and we also screened vapors lowering it up and down towards ground surface. As I mentioned, camp operated continuously during early foundation work. There were no gaps in camp operation. Also, out of an abundance of caution, proactive measures were implemented upon notification of a mercury vapor detection at a perimeter station. If we did observe detections at a perimeter station, we took these measures. It was very proactive, and that's what the RAP and camp suggest, and that's what we did. We did have 2 perimeter exceedances of mercury vapor. These were exceedances of 15-minute time-weighted average camp thresholds. One was observed on 5/16/22. At the time that perimeter camp station had a time-weighted average reading above 1 microgram per meter cube, there were no ground intrusive activities that were going on. It was the end of the workday, and the contractor was in the process of covering exposed soil and fill. No on-site source of mercury vapor was identified with the 505 unit. It was not identified by the mobile monitor at the camp station where the exceedance was detected by the 405. It was not observed or confirmed by the Jerome 505 unit when the mobile monitor walked between the work zone and the perimeter either. Based on evaluation of previous data from this very specific Jerome 405 unit, the unit was replaced and switched out. On 5/19, there was another 15-minute time-weighted average camp threshold exceedance for mercury vapor. At that time, work was halted upon notification of a mercury vapor detection. Merconex was proactively applied to exposed soil and fill out of an abundance of caution. The Jerome 505 unit confirmed that the mercury vapor detections were erroneous. The readings in the work zone were at background, and the readings with the Jerome 505 between the work zone and the perimeter of the site also did not detect mercury vapor above background, and certainly not at concentrations above 1 microgram per meter cube. This specific unit in this perimeter station was water damaged. This was identified when we went to troubleshoot the unit. When we took the J405 offline, we had a J505 right next to the camp station to ensure continuous operation of camp while the troubleshooting occurred. And we replaced the J405 unit. We actually had to send it back to the manufacturer because the water did damage the unit. And the manual says very specifically that humidity and water can damage units. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, when we are alerted that there are detections of mercury vapor in our camp stations via the telemetry system, we take certain measures. One or more of the following measures are generally undertaken. If it's a mercury vapor detection, MERCON X is applied to exposed soils as a proactive measure. Exposed soil and fill and stockpiles and any containers are covered to the extent practical. We use the J505 unit with the mobile monitor to screen both the work zone and the area between the work zone and the camp station where a mercury vapor reading is detected. And we also screen the camp station with the Jerome 505 unit. Let me just go over a couple more things here. We also, if a reading does not appear to be valid, so if it appears to be a false positive per the work zone and camp screening with the J505 unit, we will take that equipment online, keep the J505 unit at the camp station. We will recalibrate the equipment or regenerate the equipment. We'll switch out a battery, we'll adjust wiring, or we'll perform other troubleshooting activities, all the while continuously screening the area with the J505 unit. Before we resume work, if work is stopped, we confirm that all units are operating properly, i.e. batteries are full, and that they are actively transmitting data via telemetry prior to resuming work. Just want to touch on one thing. Scarlett had mentioned that we identified acetone vapor as something that can interfere with mercury vapor readings. So on 5/19, there was a mercury vapor detection in a camp unit. And what we learned is that there is a correlation between torch cutting and mercury vapor detections. Acetone vapor is noted in the J505 manual as being a potential interfering compound. We confirmed the type of gas that the contractor was using for torch cutting, and it's acetylene, which is dissolved in acetone for stabilization. And then what we did with DEC present was we basically took the 505 unit and we brought it directly over to the welding activities. And as the unit got closer to the welding activities, the readings on the unit increased significantly. In fact, the highest reading directly next to the acetylene that was being used in the welding operations was 10.75 micrograms per meter cubed. So wanted to just explain how that interference works and how we were able to determine that it indeed was an interfering compound with confirmation from the manufacturer. All right, Heidi mentioned that we are committed to taking additional measures beyond what we've been doing so far, really as another level of redundancy, really an additional belt and suspenders approach for the protection of the community. And this isn't a reaction to any specific data that we got during the performance of our work. So during the next phase of work, and I'll get into the schedule for that in just a minute, these are the measures that we'll undertake. We will continue to proactively apply dust and vapor suppressing foam and MERCON X. We will place a camp station across the street when there is exposed soil within 20 feet of the fence line. I want to be clear that this is the fence line and not the property line, because we will be excavating right up to the property line. We'll use perimeter sleeves for odor neutralization. These basically look like socks that are filled with odor neutralizers, and they'll be hung on the perimeter fence approximately every 10 feet around the site. We have had spare equipment, and we're going to have even more spare equipment, both equipment and batteries, and we'll have spares of the 405s, the 505s, the dust tracker PM10 monitors, and the photoionization detectors, which measure total volatile organic compounds. And as a final measure, prior to shutting down the camp, we'll take a couple of additional measures. We're going to apply a daily overnight cover. It will consist of polyethylene sheeting and or Atmos AC65 long duration foam. We will also, and that will be placed on exposed soil and fill. We'll also apply Mercon X prior to the temporary cover in the mercury impacted hotspot area. And we will confirm that the perimeter and work zone concentrations are at or below background conditions with the Jerome 505 units before we take camp down for the evening. We wanted to touch on community notification. I saw some comments that came in during the performance of our work that asked why wasn't the community notified when there were detections of mercury vapor in our camp stations. The community will be notified per the RAP when there is a significant vapor release that requires calling emergency response coordinators or 911. No such event has occurred since the start of work. The community will not be notified when there is an exceedance of an action level or when mitigation measures are implemented. So I want to be really clear on that. Also wanted to just provide again information for the construction hotline for construction related inquiries. The number here is for calls and SMS messages. Also, there's an email setup, and we have a website that Howard Hughes has established for this project that contains documents related to the Brownfield Cleanup Program, including our daily field reports. Just to go into schedule briefly before I turn it over to our noise gurus. The mercury impacted hotspot and underground storage tank removals have been delayed until schools are closed for summer. So that work will begin at the very end of June or in early July. Remedial activities are anticipated, here we go, to resume on June 28th, so at the very end of June. Prior to June 28th, a couple of things are going to happen. The perimeter fence will be bumped out a little bit further, so it won't be right up against the perimeter of the site. There'll be installation of a test pile on Saturday, June 11th, and there will be additional soil borings for waste disposal that occur on June 11th as well. And the camp will be operating during the soil disturbance activities on June 11th. And that's it for me. I'll turn it over to AKRF for the noise.
Thanks, Mimi. So I can go through some of our discussion about the noise. My name is Dan Abatamarco. I'm with AKRF. We worked on the construction noise analysis for the environmental impact statement for this project, and it was an exhaustive analysis of construction noise, including predictions of construction noise at surrounding receptors in the community throughout the period of construction over time. And of course, the construction noise was predicted to fluctuate, and it will fluctuate depending on what activities will be occurring. That predictive analysis showed us that the highest noise levels would occur during impact pile driving, should it occur, and the overlap of foundation construction with superstructure concrete operations, pouring the concrete for the superstructure. During those maximum noise level construction activities, the predictions showed interior noise levels at surrounding receptors with their windows closed in the up to the high 50s in A-weighted decibels. This is comparable to typical conversation or slightly higher than the typical ambient noise in an office setting. And as part of that EIS construction noise analysis, there was a program of construction noise reduction measures developed and established as commitments through that environmental review process. And I'll go into those specific construction noise reduction measures now, starting at the next slide. So some of these noise reduction measures are already part of the requirements of the New York City Noise Control Code. So those include noise emission limits for each individual piece of equipment. For instance, an excavator is limited to 85 decibels, and there are comparable limits for all the individual pieces of equipment. There's a commitment to use grid power rather than generators or diesel equipment as early as possible, as early as it's possible to connect the equipment to that power. Configuration of the construction site to minimize vehicles having to back up and use their backup alarms. Truck engine idling is limited to 3 minutes or less. And then, of course, there's the use of the site perimeter construction fence, which is already in place, although it will be bumped out and altered, as we'll discuss. Impact, for any impact pile driving, if that is to occur, an impact cushion is required to be used on the piles to reduce the impact sound. And then impact noise generally. And when we say impact noise, we're talking about noise that has a rapid onset and a decay, like really anything that comes from an object hitting another object. So we've got jackhammering and pile driving as our primary examples here, is limited to 15 decibels over the ambient level, the non-construction level, and all other noise, non-impact noise, so like excavating, concrete operations, is limited to 85 decibels, at least 50 feet away from the source. So beyond those noise code construction noise reduction commitments, there were project specific commitments that the EIS established and were memorialized in the restrictive declaration for the project. So for certain specific pieces of equipment, there were lower noise emission limits than the code requires established. For instance, the hoist and chipping guns are restricted to lower levels. The site perimeter noise barrier will be taller than the minimum required by the code and will have a cantilever towards the work area. This provides better shielding for, let's say, second floor windows and up from any at grade or below grade noise, construction noise. So that would be, you know, for instance, concrete trucks, which are all at grade, or excavation, which is below grade. Concrete trucks are committed to be located inside the noise barrier. So they are separated from the community by that fence whenever they're pouring or being washed out. And those are the times when the concrete mixer trucks are really making their most noise. And then beyond those on-site controls, there's also receptor controls, and those consist of provision of storm windows for receptors in the noise impact zone, and that's really all the buildings that are immediately adjacent to construction, if those receptors do not already have insulated glass windows, and provision of air conditioners for those same receptors if they do not already have air conditioning, which allows them to maintain that closed window condition and really reduce the amount of construction noise that is reaching their interior space. We'll go to the next slide. So even beyond those commitments from the EIS and restricted deck, there are additional noise reduction measures being considered at this point. And so one of those would be absorptive material, which are often referred to as sound blankets, mounted on the interface of the noise barriers, which reduces noise being reflected from the interface of the noise barrier back into the community. The noise barrier being taller by sort of connecting it and combining it with overhead protection, which can allow for a higher noise barrier for certain portions of the site, which would be considered for the building construction portion of the project. And then avoidance of impact pile driving so this would be replaced with drilled pile installation, which is much quieter and which has a sound character that is much less disruptive than that impact sound of impact pile driving. So this is being considered for pile installation and sheeting pile installation going forward. On the vibration side, there is a construction vibration monitoring program in place to determine whether the construction is producing vibration that could potentially cause any damage at adjacent buildings. Vibration monitors installed at 11 locations. The program includes 11 specific locations with individual vibration monitors or are often referred to as seismographs to measure that vibration. They are continuously monitoring throughout the construction whenever anything is occurring subgrade, and there is a not to exceed threshold level of 0.5 inches per second. That's from a DOB regulation for historic buildings. It's intended to protect any structure that might be more fragile than a typical new construction building. And then below that, we have a warning threshold of 0.25 inches per second. So if vibration even starts to get close to that not to exceed level, there is an instant alert to the on-site construction team. And when they receive that alert, they can determine and evaluate the source of whatever is going on the site and is producing vibration, and alter means or methods as necessary to avoid exceeding that not to exceed threshold. And that is the summary of the noise mitigation and vibration monitoring for this project. And I'll turn it back to I think to Adam. Is that who'll speak next? I'm not sure.
No, I think I mean, I'm available for Q&A as are other members of the development and consulting team. But I think we turn it back to Senator Kavanaugh to lead the discussion here, and
Yeah, so
we'll go
we
from
have,
there.
sorry, let me make sure I'm not, we have on the agenda, in the agenda we were next going to hear from the community consultants, and then the discussion, and we have DEP there present. And is that, given what we've heard so far, I'm just wondering if should we continue through presentations or discuss what we've heard so far? I guess Laura, you'd be up. Do you want to just proceed here?
Hi, Senator. Yes, I'm fine with proceeding here. Thank you, everybody. So we've had a series of calls earlier this week with DC and DOH, Tom Facil and I have, and also with Langan, to sort of go over what they both just presented and get our feedback and input, which we did provide to them. And as Heidi indicated, and I think Mimi as well, they're still working on exactly what the specific means and methods are going to be for proceeding with the next phase of work. But we're happy to see that more proactive approach is being taken. I think the redundancy that was already built into the camp is now going to be supplemented by additional best management practices that were available on site, and as Mimi indicated, were used when levels of mercury vapor were reported that were above the 1 microgram per cubic meter action level, even though it wasn't above the actual 15-minute time-weighted average. It was above just the 1 microgram per cubic meter level. They did proceed with shutting the job down, with putting Mercon X on the soil, if that was the appropriate action, if there was any soil exposed. But I think it's really, really important to underscore and sort of reiterate what Scarlett indicated from DOH and also what Mimi indicated, because I think I'm sorry, there's some confusion with, you know, what is specified as far as the action level. The action level, as everyone indicated, is the 15-minute time-weighted average. If 1 microgram per cubic meter is reported in an instantaneous reading, at that point, there have already been actions that were taken that really weren't even necessary based upon the way the camp is structured. So they are proceeding in a very conservative manner. The concern, I think, is with wording, perhaps sometimes talking about exceedances. An exceedance of an action level would only be above the 15-minute time-weighted average. It wouldn't be above an instantaneous reading of 1 microgram per cubic meter if it's instantaneous. That's technically speaking not an exceedance. So I think one of the things that we've recommended to DOH and also and DEC and also to Langan is that we word the reports clearer so that the messaging is very clear. These are all values that Tom Facil and I were involved in establishing in the very beginning of the project. If everyone remembers, I don't know if you do, but in the very beginning, there was a 15-minute time-weighted average action level of 3 micrograms per cubic meter suggested and proposed in the draft remedial investigation work plan. Tom and I felt, and others felt, that that was too high for this site, that given the very high concentration of sensitive receptors and how close the site was to those receptors, the 2 schools, the apartment buildings, et cetera, that the level should be 1 and should be lowered. And we provided, documentation in support of that. DEC and DOH ultimately agreed, and Langan and Howard Hughes incorporated that lower level in the work, in the camp. So you couple that with the fact that we've got instruments in the form of a Jerome J405, which is the only instrument readily available that can last a full 8 to 10 hour day, even though it's really pushing the limits of the machine. It's the only one that can be wired in to an automatic telemetry system so that the data are provided immediately to the on-site technicians doing the air quality monitoring. But the J405 has some issues with respect to interference. And it's really being pushed to its limits with this 8 to 10 hour day. So that's where the J505 comes in. It's a different operating instrument. It has a lower detection limit, but it also has to be used in a manner that makes sense. So we've provided some input to DEC, DOH, and Langan regarding our thoughts on how the J505s could be used very effectively. They're looking at those recommendations. And I think there's overall agreement that the perfect world would be that you can compare instantaneous readings through the J405 with the J505 if it was stationed in the same location. But that's not really practical when the dedicated technicians are also responsible for walking from the work zone to the downwind camp to make sure nothing is actually traveling out of the work zone before it would ever reach the camp. That part of the community air monitoring plan was added in based on comments from the public and from Tom and I as an early warning system before anything would ever get to the perimeter camp. So as DEC, DOH, and Langan have already stated, but I want to put a fine point on it, this camp program is meant to have redundancies. There's going to be some malfunction and some occasional wiring and overheating and potentially moisture issues with any kind of air monitoring equipment that's used. It's the nature of the way these instruments are designed and operated, and there are challenges that need to be immediately addressed. And there's ways in which I think some of these problems can be troubleshooted a little bit ahead of time before the equipment is brought to the field. And we've talked about that with Langan as well, and they're looking at that. But with respect to the actions that are taken, the protocols are being adhered to in terms of when you do get a reading, what the next step should be. So the emphasis really is on action level. When you hit a 1 microgram per cubic meter, 15-minute time-weighted average, you act. And the actions, as Mimi pointed out, involve shutting the work down, taking proactive measures to minimize any generation of mercury or volatile organic vapors by using the appropriate foams, covering excavations with plastic, looking with the J505 to see whether or not there is an actual mercury vapor issue, and with the PID if there's an actual VOC issue. So these are all the best management practices that are being put into place. During the 421A excavation activities, when the soil excavation work first got underway, as DC indicated, there were some hiccups with the beginning of that work. Those issues were rectified. And going forward, it's very important that that work started in an area outside of where the mercury impacted area is, sort of as a trial run, if you will, to what the best management practices and the camp protocols are going to be for the next phase of work, which will include the excavation in the former thermometer factory footprint, for that mercury impacted soil, and also removal of the underground storage tanks and the petroleum impacted soils. So that next activity is what Mimi was talking about, getting started at late June into July and beyond. We've asked for a schedule that I know that they're still working on for the total duration of that activity. But the adjustments that DEC and DOH have discussed with Langan, and then they have discussed with us, Tom Facil and I, provide an added level of proactiveness that we're happy to see, including when the work is shut down at the end of the day, covering areas of exposed soil either with plastic sheeting to the extent possible based on the size of the excavation, and also using the foam, long-lasting foam, in order to suppress any potential for odor or vapor or dust generation overnight or on a weekend. One thing I would like to ask is that we provide to the community the information on the Atmos foam, and make sure that they have that in advance of the next phase of work starting, and that we, Tom and Priscilla and I, also receive it. We've also asked for some information, more information about the odor sleeves, so that we have that as well, just so that we can review it and provide it to the community so they're aware of that. These are all additional efforts that I think are, again, proactive in nature. There are other measures, I think, that are still being discussed amongst the agencies in Langan and Howard Hughes, based on comments that Tom and I provided and based on our dialogue. But I think all of this together is adding that additional redundancy, and as Scarlett indicated, with the goal of having nothing migrate off the site. To that extent, I just want to speak briefly on the 2 site visits that my team have made. One was on May 17th, which was the Tuesday after the EPC meeting, where a lot of concerns were raised by the public based on the work the preceding week, especially May 11th, when there were some equipment malfunctions that were occurring. When we come onto the site, we do a perimeter monitoring first. We check the air quality around the outside of the fence at the ground level, at a 3-foot high level, and at a 5-foot high level to represent the child and adult breathing zone. We do a sweep around the perimeter, all 4 sides, at the fence line and across the street, including at the air intakes at Southbridge Towers. On May 17th, that Tuesday after the EPC meeting, we found no exceedances, no detections of mercury vapor, volatile organics, or dust above background. And background was established based on our own instruments and also in looking at the data from Langan. We then went on site and had interactions with the on-site Langan folks. There were some, protocols on site that we did not observe being outside of the protocols in the remediation work plan. Those were later brought to our attention. We relayed them to Langan, and those were addressed. We made a second site visit on May 26th, again, doing the same type of sweep on the exterior, both at the fence line, ground level, 3-foot high, 5-foot high, and then across the street on all 4 sides. So Peck, Water Street, Beekman, Pearl Street. Again, found nothing above background. Most readings, in fact, on both dates were 0, but nothing at all above background. And on the 26th, we were there for the entire day and did 3 sweeps an hour around the entire perimeter. And again, found nothing, either 0 or nothing above background for any of the parameters, mercury, volatile organics, or dust. The day we were on site, we observed all field protocols being strictly adhered to, including the washing of tire trucks and deconning the trucks before they left the site, making sure all trucks were tarped, et cetera. So, and I want to give Tom Facila an opportunity. I know that there's been concerns from with respect to noise from the Blue School and other schools surrounding the site. Important to underscore the fact that this next phase of work is going to start after schools are out of session, but these other protocols are still going to be put in place for the additional redundancy and added proactive steps, which we're very happy to see. And I'll be on the call for the duration if anyone has any questions. So I'm going to pass it over to Tom Facillo, the environmental consultant for the Blue School.
Great, and thank you everybody who's been very thorough so far. Just a time check, we are supposed to, conclude by 12:30, and we assume have some discussion to be had. So, Tom, if you could give us a, and I should acknowledge, DEP City near NYC DEP is on the call as well. I think they're listed as maybe being a little later, but I just ask them to speak briefly about noise, regulation, mitigation, their perspective on this after Tom, and then we'll go to Q&A if that's okay.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I think Laura gave a pretty good summation. We have had some very long and detailed conversations with DEC, DOH, and Langan over the past week regarding concerns that we have raised, certainly from a Blue School perspective. Noise and vibration was certainly a significant issue at the beginning of the process when I guess the asphalt was being removed, that there was extensive noise and vibration that was certainly above a conversation level in Blue School. So we have raised that as an issue to DC, DOH, and Langan. They're certainly aware of it. We understand that the contractor's been given directives not to use the methods they were using at that time that was generating the noise and vibration, which was very disruptive for the school, especially given that the location where that work was being done was pretty much within just feet of Blue School. So in that corner of 250 Water Street. So that we have raised that concern. We understand that steps are being taken to mitigate noise. We appreciate the AKRF description of the actions that are being taken and appreciate those. And as all the community, I mean, Blue School's concerns are the same as the community concerns relative to making sure that the monitoring programs are robust enough and the equipment's robust enough to make sure that we are being safe and that the community is not being exposed. Just one thing I was happy to hear in discussions with the DEC, they indicated that they do plan to have DEC representatives on site periodically and maybe frequently, which I think is helpful to make sure that there's a third party set of eyes on what's going on. So we appreciate that. I think that's about it. I think Laura covered most of the other things that we've had, as I said, extensive discussions with DEC, DOH, and Langan over the past week, which we are happy to see the additional proactive steps being taken to ensure that the work is going to be done safely. So I think that's it for me.
Great. And folks from DEP, do you just want to introduce yourself and just give any quick thoughts?
Hi, I'm Mark Page. I'm the acting director for the Bureau of Environmental Compliance. And we also have a few other people. I think Jerry Kelpin is on and Karen Ellis. And with me, we also have Alyssa Preston. So we'd be happy to speak to any noise questions or noise enforcement questions. We have been in discussions with the developer and their noise consultant, as well as the Blue School, I think yesterday, and in other adjacent buildings about what we can do to help keep down the noise. And we've, in the discussions with the Blue School, we're going to be putting remote noise monitoring devices at that facility as well as an adjacent building to help us keep track of the noise at the site.
And if as this work proceeds, if people have concerns about noise, in real time, is calling 311, calling DEP something they should be doing?
Yeah, calling 311 would be the best way for them to get in contact with us, because that gets them into our complaint system and we'll get them prioritized into our responses.
Yeah, and we were happy to hear about the sort of noise monitor initiative. Can you just talk a little bit, for those who may not be familiar with what's going on there, just talk a little bit more about what the plan is there?
So basically it's a noise monitor sensor where we would install it in a location, presumably, thank you for the assistance from the principal of the Blue School, and as Mark said, an adjacent building. It takes real-time readings, so it helps us better understand the time frames and the duration that it occurs, so we can better do proactive monitoring of our own, as well as enforcement if necessary, to work with the contractors to see what we can do for additional mitigation. We know Dan, we know that he's familiar with the noise construction mitigation rules, and we appreciate him doing his due diligence to ensure that the additional mitigation measures are in place in terms of the perimeter fences and also the quieter makes and models and the soft tips on the pile drivers. That should help, but that would also help us with our inspectorial needs to see when the spikes occur, so we can curtail our enforcement so when it's most practical to the needs of the community.
Great. Okay. So again, and thank you, DEP, thank you all for joining us, this group. We really appreciate it. Just one more, before we get to Q&A, just one more to make sure we have all the topics out there. We have a conversation in previous meetings about the kind of archaeological findings, and I think Emily Mead from RKRF might be the person to address it. But is there anybody here who can address if there's any update on that?
Yeah, Elizabeth Mead from AKRF
forgive me.
was not able to attend today. I mean, the update would be, I'd say, would be very brief. You know, essentially the AKRF archaeologist, which is in this case was Elizabeth, was on site for a number of days during the initial foundation work. And in particular, anytime there was excavation below 8 feet as required by the approved archaeological work plan by the Landmarks Preservation Commission. So she was out there monitoring. There were no items of significance that were found. So there's not really much to report at this stage. But obviously, as site development progresses and larger areas are excavated, that they'll continue to be involved. There was also a site visit by Amanda Sutphin from LPC during one of those days when AKRF was monitoring. So they're up to speed with what's been occurring at the site.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, so we are at 12:03. We're supposed to go till 12:30. The order I have people with their hands raised, and I guess for the folks in the room, all participating under the name of Kate Amber on our screens. If you can maybe you just flag for us if there's a question there. Maybe Emily, you can wave at us or something. But I'm going to jump to, I actually have somebody listed as iPhone 4. So we're going to call on the anonymous iPhone 4. Who is that?
I'm sorry, that's Jason Friedman again.
Okay, you're back. Great.
I'm on a construction site, which is important because I spend most of my life on a construction site. I want to say to people that are monitoring this, above and beyond these chemical, things that we talk about here, it seems to me like the developer is following the rules, exceeding the rules. If this is an indication of how the project's going to go forward, I'm happy. And I live across the street and I'm on Community Board 1, and I've heard about this project for 8 years in many different venues. So my hope is to Howard Hughes, after we're done with the Brownfield program, can we please keep this level of engagement with the people as we put superstructure up, as we don't hear from the team that we're hearing from now, about the specifics of the mercury remediation and after we get over that. So it was kind of a comment, it's not really a question, but please, stick around with us, the people that live around here in the schools after we get past the mercury.
I think I'm, Brian, going to answer that if you don't mind me jumping.
Yeah, great.
The initial intent, and Saul had agreed, was that this working group morphs into a construction working group as we move along. Hence, our Pat from Quality of Life and Alice Blank are both here to attest, to specifically work with the community on that. I don't think the working group through the entire construction project, because that seems super onerous. We don't need to know when they're rolling couches in for their lobby at that point, but the intent was to get through the largest bulk of the Brownfield cleanup, through that and through the major parts of construction that are going to be the most onerous. And then this working group would close and go back to the regular outreach that Saul Scherer and his team do with community-based engagement. I hope that's enough of an answer to sway people to understand that this should be here for a while.
And I would just, from the Howard Hughes side, say that we are committed to the ongoing engagement. And I think the commitment was to be involved in this particular working group through the remediation. There will be some working group that we are committed to going forward. It may not be exactly in this format when we transition into construction, but that's something we are, committed to, working on with the community and coming up with the best approach so that it's the most productive for everyone involved.
Great. And I'll just add that we're committed to continuing this as long as is useful, and obviously having it evolve in terms of the participants and the issues, as we did today with adding noise and DEP to the mix. So I think Alice is next. And again, I don't want to neglect people in the room. So I don't know, stand up and throw something at the camera if you want to get our attention. But Alice.
Thanks, Brian. I just want to first of all, many thanks for the working group finally getting it back up in action. We all realize how important this is and how effective it is rather than fielding complaints willy-nilly. This is an exceptionally effective way to go about moving forward. In that vein, I just really want to underscore the importance, and I address Adam specifically because I know he's been very wonderful about keeping up with the archaeological, but we really need to have Elizabeth at the next meeting, and really need to better understand what, even if nothing was found, what that nothing is. Just much like what we do go over in terms of toxicity, in terms of historical preservation. These are really critical things that I think the community is really would be interested to know. So just for edification purposes, a few minutes from her and from LPC's rep. I think you mentioned Amanda Sutton. That would be great to add into the presentations going forward. Thanks.
Thanks. And you can apologize from me for getting her name wrong, but we'll get it right if she comes to the next meeting. Okay, Megan.
Sorry, did you Maggie or did you Megan?
Megan.
Sorry,
verb.
great.
A new
Thanks.
verb for each working group. Go ahead.
Hey, how are you? Thanks very much. I wanted just to point out and start with that there's absolutely no criticism about the stoppage or the use of the Mercon, none whatsoever. I mean, we as a community completely are appreciative of that sort of reaction when the numbers went differently than they had. So thank you very much. I guess what is sort of still up for debate though is in listening to Scarlett speak for about 15 minutes, no, 5-10 minutes. And the speaker before her is that there are so many different factors that are involved with understanding how the lot reacts on a daily. Sometimes it was the humidity, sometimes it was the air quality, sometimes it's the material that's being pulled out of the ground, sometimes so that's what becomes for us worrisome as a community, is that every day it's so different, and every day the monitors seem to have an issue for a different sort of outside reason, which is why we're a big fan of the tent, and that would eliminate a lot of these variables. So I just want to point that out, but in no way was anyone critical of the steps that were taken. Greatly appreciate that as a community. And then I had one quick question. A lot of the times when I'm looking at the logs, there's a part where it talks about if there's a spike in any of the air monitoring, it says that there was no ground intrusive work happening. Can someone define what that means, ground intrusive work?
Hi, Megan, this is Heidi Dudek, and Paul, I believe you're on, but in general, ground intrusive work is when they're doing, when they're excavating or breaking up the concrete or something to that effect, or drilling. So where they're doing something where they're actively disturbing where the contamination is. Paul, do you want to make sure?
That's okay. Yeah, but that was going to be my point, is that when I was looking at the logs of when things were happening, and then also cross-referencing against video that we have of the lot, and also eyewitnesses at Southbridge and around the area, there might not be ground intrusive work, but there's a lot of dirt being moved around at exactly those times. Specifically, I'll point the video to you and I'll show you how they line up. But there was a lot of work on the day of the 24th that dirt was being taken from a container that looked like it was being stored on site for a while, and then put into the trucks to be taken away. during that time, there was lots and lots of activity with the camps. So I think that when you read along in the daily reports that it says no intrusive work, it's a little bit, I'm not gonna say not honest, but it makes it sound like, oh, so it must be a mistake. But when you look at the video, you can see really why there would be legitimate increases in all of those camp monitors at those times.
And I think that's, sorry, my computer just decided that it's, hopefully this
Yeah, I
works.
saw you freeze.
Yeah, it's just decided it wasn't didn't like my plug. Hopefully this works now. We have discussed with Langan that we're going to ask for some modifications as to the way that the camp presents information so that it's more easily understood by the public, and that it provides you more information. Since I can't see what you're looking at right there, but we hear you, we understand your concerns, and we have discussed that we're going to, prior to the implementation of the remainder of the remedy, update some of the way that the information is presented in the camp.
Okay, I just would like to point out though that VOCs and mercury and those things went up when there was a lot of dirt being moved around, which I guess is to be expected, but I want to make sure that that's clear to people listening, that every time where it says there was no ground intrusive work, that's a very specific item on the site, and it doesn't really reflect the activity that was happening, which is a lot of dirt being moved. And then I'm just curious, this is me just being nosy. What's in the stinky sock thing, Mimi? The stuff that's going to be around that they're going to hang up to make it so there's not so much smells? I'm just curious, because can I get one for my closet?
That's funny. Paul, do you know offhand? Otherwise, we'll have to send you the information, Megan. I don't have it super handy.
I know the folks who live around here and who can see into the lot, they're going to ask. I know it's going to be a question.
Of course. Yeah, we're happy to provide information on a specification on the product that's being used.
That could be part of the swag program when the project's done.
Yeah. And then one other point to bring up regarding when the monitor is walking. So there's a reaction at a campsite, and then the tech comes over with the handheld device. Is there a way for my screen to be shared? I have a question about, is that happening, or how do I do that? Does anyone know? Can you see that?
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Mm.
Just maybe.
Try again, Megan.
All right. I probably have to acknowledge something, right?
I just made you a co-host.
Okay. Oh, so share screen. Here we go. Here we go. All right. Do you see my guy now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the gentleman with the handheld going around to check. Is that
what's the question?
And then there's a lot of times when we see the question is this a standard sort of how a tech would be using it to determine, and there's many videos of it, of certain people walking around swinging it around in the air. I don't know, and these are the questions that get brought to me, and so I promise people that I will share what I see and also ask for some more guidance on it. See, that seems a little bit more focused.
I don't know the context for when this video was taken, so I can't respond. I'm happy to have you provide us with the date and the time. We can look at the data and we can speak with the person that was monitoring and understand what specifically they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, he might not have even been doing any of that stuff at that moment, right? Right. Okay.
I didn't say that, but if you provide more context, we're happy to respond.
Great. And I will try to stop sharing my video, or you guys get to
see this man.
Be aware.
He
Yeah,
will
see,
come,
it's
he will
thrilling
come to
video.
come to the next meeting as well.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, Maggie.
Hey, can you guys hear me? First of all, I noticed the DEC sent an email out in response to my email from, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, the email came about 30 minutes before this meeting, so I did not have time to thoroughly read through it. So I'm going to do my best to comment without being fully educated on your responses. But I just want to piggyback on what Megan said. And I know that, ultimately the concern is that everybody is safe on the lot, and community members have come to Children's First with questions about safety. And, I think the most important part is that everything is transparent so that people can make personal choices. There's not usually a site where you have kids so close to the lot. Like one of the days we were sent pictures and Blue School was doing an event and the kids were like 5 feet from the fence. And so I think the most important thing is that people are allowed to make a personal choice, just like during pregnancy. Like some people don't eat any sushi and don't have any alcohol. Some people have no caffeine, and families need to make their own personal choice on what feels safe for them. So I just don't want to dictate like, this is fine, this is safe. Like that's a personal choice for families to make based on the data that we're observing. With that said, it's been really hard for people to make sense of everything because of all the issues with the data collection. I know, Laura, you touched on the accuracy of the 405, but this has been going on for 3 years, that every time there is an elevated reading on one of the 405 machines, someone walks over with a 505 and says it's not accurate. And so feedback that we get from people would be like, how do we know that the 0 readings are accurate? What if those are not accurate? And I just really am concerned about having, like, if this was an experiment and somebody was doing a study for like the NIH, or you were doing an academic study, if every time you ran studies and collected data and the equipment was either inaccurate or malfunctioning, it would be thrown out. It wouldn't be allowed, or I hired somebody and every time they did the work, they would be fired. Like this just can't be acceptable that these pieces of equipment are not working. So either you have to have 2 monitors at every station, or, as I've pointed out multiple times, the EPA has said there are issues with the Jeromes. Why can't we get a Lumex there next to it so that you can go over and look at the log data from the Lumex so we have accurate readings? And I think that's the concern of the community, is if we're taking the data at face value, there's mercury there and people are nervous. And we saw mercury levels approaching action level in an area in the lot where it wasn't that high. And I think people are really nervous going into summer. And, my follow-up question would be, what are the possibilities of getting a 10? If we're not getting a 10, I'd like to know why. What is the timeline for this work? I know work starts, as Mimi said, on June 28th. When is it supposed to be done? What if things get delayed? What's going to happen on September 8th when the kids come back at school? So I think, our biggest concern are the kids that are outside that lot during school hours. So I just wanted to leave it at that. Thank you.
Responses? Especially, we've had a number of inquiries about the tent, and I think we have discussed it in meetings before. But can folks, either the developer consultants or the DEC or the community, talk about the desire
I think
of a tent over the site?
I think at this, hi, Brian, sorry. This is Heidi Dudek from DEC. We've evaluated the information we had. Again, Scarlett from Department of Health went over the redundancies in the camp, as did Laura, the equipment, and that we're not relying on just one piece of equipment, and we are running contiguous camp throughout the entire process. Again, these threshold values that when reached or are being reached, we're implementing additional best management practices. At this point in time, we're moving forward with that. I said we are, as I said previously, we're working on some additional measures to put in place to, again, help to reassure everybody that everything is being done in a protective manner. and the goal is to have the mercury hotspot remediated along with the spill area where the underground storage tanks are, where the petroleum contamination is, during the summer prior to school being in place or being back in classrooms. We're working through that sequence with Langan. Again, we've requested some additional measures be put in place. We're discussing with them. We feel that these measures, that when they're implemented, will provide yet another level of redundancy and protectiveness to the public without the necessity to go to a tent, which would have some other issues with it that would need to be addressed. That but again, I'd like to make sure that everybody understands we're evaluating everything on a day-to-day basis. During the entire time that this limited investigation was going on, constant communication was going on both internally and with Langan and Department of Health. And we're going to evaluate it, and we're going to see how everything goes. And if we feel that something needs to be changed, we can stop work and we can request additional measures be put in place. But at this point in time, we feel that these new modifications, in addition to everything that was already there that was extremely conservative, will provide a safe and remediation for this site. Because our goal is to get to the final remediation as quick as possible.
Yeah, and Heidi,
is the department.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say one thing, piggybacking on that comment about oversight. I know I looked up some of the engineers and the staff that was on site during the last set of work. Some of the Langan engineers, one of the girls that was there every day was like an engineer in training. She was pretty young, only like a year of experience. The DEC staff that was on there for oversight only had like 5 years experience. So I'm hopeful that you guys can make sure that the people that are on site when this remediation really begins is staff that's really well trained and has the field experience to make sure everything is going according to plan.
I'd like to say that our staff is very well trained, and that the people in the field, I have utmost confidence of them, and that they always have at their constant communication other engineers here on within DEC if they have any questions, and we have other people in the field that also come by. But please be assured that we have confidence in our folks, and that we make sure that we are making sure that everything is being done correctly.
Same at Langan.
And just one more note on the monitoring units. We are in the process of exploring a couple of different options for incorporating the drone 505s into the perimeter camp monitoring. We've identified a company that has told us they can incorporate it into telemetry, so we're going to be testing that out. And then as backup, we're looking into different ways to either have multiple units at a station or have staff stationed to monitor drone 505. So we are looking into incorporating those units into the perimeter camp.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. We have a bunch of people asking in the chat, and I think Maggie sort of alluded this to it, but the question of when people are happy some things are being delayed to the summer when the schools aren't in session. What is the schedule? What will be done? Is there confidence that the critical work, remediation work will be done before school is back in session?
That is the intent. I mean, and that is what everybody is working towards. That's the goal. I've enough construction experience to know never to promise something I can't guarantee, but that is what everybody is working towards. That's what we've been talking. I'm sure Mimi would say ad nauseum with Langan to ensure that those are the things that need to be done. We've discussed all the things that we really do listen to the community. We've discussed it with Langan. We understand your concerns, and our goal is to get the hotspot area and that which is from the mercury standpoint the most critical area remediated before school begins. And then there's also the other issue of where the underground storage tanks were, and that petroleum area that also needs to, that we're hoping can be remediated before school in session because that has the odors that may be associated with it. But again, we do hear you, and we're trying to make sure that it's done as quickly as possible, but most importantly, as safely as possible.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so we have 4 minutes left. I see Lawrence Hong from the Assembly Member's Office. Do you want to jump in here, Lawrence?
Yes, thank you so much, Senator. So obviously, thank you for helping host this meeting. Yulene is actually currently receiving an award for her community service, so she wasn't able to attend. She was trying to hop on virtually, but I don't think it happened. However, I did have a couple of concerns that she sent over to me that she wanted to be addressed or at least heard in terms of comments. The first one was the camp information transparency. I think Heidi already mentioned that they were looking towards improving some of the transparency and how much information is given out. So we'll be on the lookout for that. That's something that a lot of community folks have asked us about. And then the second thing is the noise mitigation improvements. I know that there was some talk of a noise monitor, but it's one of the most common concerns that our office is receiving is instilling a similar or higher level of noise mitigation that was done by former council member Alan Gerson when the new school was being built. That is something that folks have been asking about and trying to get for quite some time. And we want to make sure that that is considered and obviously, if possible, done. Tenting and all that stuff is really important towards that process. And I think it goes a long way to making sure that the students who are being affected by this and the families who are being affected by this have an additional layer of protection. And then the last thing, I think Senator Kavanaugh already went over a little bit, the planned work schedule. If the planned work schedule could also be given to us as soon as possible about what is within the realm of possibility throughout the summer, while it's, I wouldn't say it's safer, but there's a lesser risk factor now that school will be out for session, stuff like that. And it'd be good to see like what sort of progress can be made on that front with these mitigations in mind. So those are the top 3 things that we've been hearing about. I left my email in the chat, of course. If people have additional concerns, I'm happy to also add those and consider those as well. And that's it for me.
You did, Brian.
There's also questions in the room as well.
That's what I was going to say. Adam in the room. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'll move closer to the camera so you can see me. Hi, I'm Adam on the South Bridge Board of Directors. Thank you for arranging, knowing we have time. So a couple of key questions or concerns. One is we really want vibration monitoring in Southbridge. We have a lot of critical infrastructure, including our steam intake for the whole complex right next to the site. We all know what happened when there was a steam explosion in front of the Pfizer office a decade ago. I'd hate for that to happen, but these are 50-year-old buildings. I know they're not technically historic, but we want to make sure there's vibration analysis, vibration monitoring in Southbridge. I have a question is, in terms of noise, I'm glad to hear about the fence, but knowing that we have people up to 400 feet above, where, and this is especially towards, this is directed towards Dan, at what floor or at what height in Southbridge do you think we get the loudest noise? Knowing there's a trigonometry problem to be solved there, knowing you can't build a fence 400 feet high. And then glad to see about the air conditioning. However, will Southbridge be compensated for the higher power consumption that we are going to deal with everyone closing their windows this year? As you know, utility and electric prices, thanks to the war in Ukraine, are about 50% higher than they were a year ago. So with now everyone closing their windows and turning their air conditioning, this is certainly going to cost Southbridge several hundred of thousands of dollars. And then finally, just a comment with the equipment, given that humidity and condensation causes problems with the equipment, I am wondering what proactive tests you guys are going to do, because it's only going to get worse during the summer. So I'm a little concerned that even in like May, you're dealing with condensation problems. And we all know what July in Manhattan is like. So those are my questions. Try to get them quick, but I realize we're at 12:31.
All right, I'm just this is Heidi Dudek with regards to the equipment. Again, that's why we're having redundancy and additional equipment put on site. Those issues with humidity and that were taken into account when the camp was prepared. And again, work being done during the summer months was at the request, we have to balance both the request from the schools and the community to not do the mercury hotspot remediation during school being in session, thereby, unfortunately, work will be taking place during those hot and humid months. But again, we have made accommodations for it. And again, that's why there's additional mitigation or best management practices going to be put in place. And we're also having additional equipment delivered to the site, or requesting to have it delivered to the site.
Just to add to that, the work doesn't proceed if the equipment's not working. So, we had many mornings where we needed to tell them to wait to start certain activities. And, going forward, if we can't get the equipment to work, we can't do the work. So that's how it works.
Okay, can I just, given the time, and I know a few people have to go, we will make sure any questions that are not addressed during this, we'll make sure we'll follow up and, try to get answers in the interim. And we also should note, it was a little bit of a delay in scheduling this. The goal of this is to try to do it monthly. So we will try to get the next one on the calendar soon. Are there any other questions or comments from the room?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I want to reiterate, we're very grateful for this opportunity to have these conversations, but these conversations are only helpful when the developer and the engineer actually implement the safety protocols that we agree upon at every meeting. And so I want to express again our extreme disappointment in not having a hotline set up before the work was beginning, that we have video of trucks that were tracked off site without being hosed down, that we had dust leaving the site, without dust monitor, dust control in place, and that the tarps were very mediocre for covering the site and the dirt that was on the site. So that's all to say that we need better we need real accountability. Heidi, you and Rafi were both on vacation. We received out of office emails for both of you when that work started. It is because of the community that we received, the DEC was on site and we had other people monitoring the site. So that needs to be proactive. You talk a lot about being proactive. We need to see that, that's actually happening.
I need to clarify something there. While either one of us were on site, we had more than one or two people filling our positions. I had my bureau director, Gerard Burke, who has 30 some odd years of construction experience, was taking the place of me as a section chief. Rafi, while he was on vacation, I had one of my other engineers, Aaron Fisher, he was on site at the beginning of this. So I just want to clarify, we had coverage at all times. There was no times that this job was not being monitored by DEC.
Okay, we need some understanding from Howard Hughes and Langan as well, that when we agree to certain safety protocols, that they actually put them in place and they deliver on their word. So just going forward, you guys we have you on watch. We are monitoring the site carefully, and we'd like to see in good faith that you should be delivering on your word. The other thing is about the sound, just curious from AKRF, when will you have something prepared for the community in terms of the sound mitigation, kind of the sound mitigation plan, the additional plan that you're going to present?
The commitments from the EIS are already memorialized in that document, which is public. The other, the additional measures being considered, are still under consideration. So once there is a determination about whether it's feasible to implement each of those, we will definitely make sure to update this group once we have clarity on exactly which of those will be implemented and are ready to be committed to in a certain way.
Yeah, and some of those aren't relevant, just to clarify, some of those aren't relevant until actual foundation construction. So, but we will come back with a confirmation of commitments on those. And we are, as it relates to commitments that were referenced from, PS 234, I think a lot of those are already covered in our plan, but that's something we're also looking into and are certainly interested in hearing more information about that to the extent it's available. We've actually done some of our own research on that, but willing to have that dialogue as well.
Is it possible to have something for us by the July meeting? And is there a possibility that we can have a little bit of a public comment period also, just to be able to weigh in on that?
I don't know if we'll have everything buttoned down by July. I mean, we're going to be, there's a full, procurement and planning process that goes on with our construction management team for some of those items, for example, the driving of piles versus drilling of piles and exactly how that foundation system will be implemented. But to the extent we can have that commitment by then, we will, but I can't guarantee that at this point, that we'll know those specifics in a month.
Okay, thank you.
Are we good in the room? Okay, with apologies for going over a bit here, I think, we have to work, I need to learn to remind myself to be more attentive to the people who took the time to physically show up at the other site. But just any, I think we've covered everything on the agenda and I don't see any hands. So just to say, Emily will reach out to you for, to get the next meeting on the calendar. We will, there were a couple of comments in the chat that maybe didn't get addressed, and those are also recorded by the record feature. So we will try to make sure that in the notes for this, we have a comprehensive list, including a couple items that may not have been fully addressed. And we look forward to continued discussion. But thank you, everybody from the community who's paying such close attention, from the schools, from the community consultants, and the developers and the state agencies who have been working hard and working with us here to make sure that all the information is on the table. And of course our co-conveners, my colleagues in elected office and the community board. So if there's no other emergent closing remarks, we're getting out 8 minutes late, but we'll adjourn this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.